Mayor John Hamilton has asked me to share his welcome, and thank you for your engagement this afternoon. He has, unfortunately, he's unable to be with us this afternoon. He has some previously scheduled travel. I want to begin this forum, as I began the last time we gathered here in July, by thanking everyone for attending this afternoon. Your presence is testament to your great concern for the Bloomington Community Farmers Market and the important role it plays in your life, whether you're a vendor or a customer. The market is an asset, an economic driver, and a vibrant community all unto itself. For many of us here, market has been an important part of our lives for decades, a way to feed our families, fresh, local food, make a living, and participate in community. It is wholly appropriate that we wish to protect this asset from any threats to its success. Before I say another word, I want to offer sincere gratitude to the vendors, staff, and customers who kept showing up this season despite many stressful moments and disruptions. Yours are the faces of courage and tenacity. Today, the City of Bloomington Parks Department finds itself at a crossroads. Following a contentious market season that included protests, unrest, fear, and even an unprecedented 2-week suspension of market operations, the Board of Parks Commissioners, informed by your wishes and the concerns of those of the Market Advisory Committee and the administration, will meet on January 9th at 4 p.m. to decide if the market should continue to be run by the city or transition to a different model. This afternoon, we hope to explore, in a spirit of concern and goodwill, some of the ramifications of the events of the last market season, review some of the laws and rules under which market operated, and inform ourselves about the options we have as a community going forward. The city has sought and received a great deal of public input through a variety of avenues, all of which is part of the ongoing deliberations. Thank you to each of you who has shared your experiences, concerns, and suggestions. I'll introduce each of our panelists in just a moment, but first a quick review of why we're here this afternoon and our format for the next hour and a half. Following market officials becoming aware early in the season of messages allegedly posted online by a longtime market vendor advocating white supremacist ideas and suggesting affiliation with a white nationalist group, a series of forums and public meetings were held to discuss the issue. Pardon me. Vendors, staff, and customers shared concerns about safety, inclusion, prejudice, fairness, and market policies during these events. The Community Justice and Mediation Center was engaged to assist, as was the Ohio State University Divided Communities Project, both of which have counseled and advised throughout the season. This has been difficult, emotion-charged work. Many of us have been frustrated and emotionally drained by a season of dealing with these issues that have no obvious or easy resolution. Well, this afternoon, we'll continue that work with a panel discussion that will include our panelists' responses to some of the most commonly raised questions and concerns. City of Bloomington Parks Department staff are distributing cards. Leslie's over there. Who else is distributing cards? Marcia is over here. Distributing cards and pencils for you to write any questions you have that the panel doesn't cover. Staff will collect those cards if you wish to hold them up, and we'll get to as many as we can following the opening statements and initial questions our panelists were given prior to this afternoon. And again, these were generated by concerns voiced prior to today and all the other avenues from which we've received questions. We're also taking questions as they come to us online. And you should know that Beverly Calmer-Anderson and Becky will be working together. If questions are quite similar, they may combine them. So if you hear a question that's kind of like yours, but not exactly yours, it's just so we don't have the same question over and over. A few housekeeping items. Just most of you have been here before. I know a lot of people here, but there are restrooms just down the hall. We have to keep this to an hour and a half today. And we do respect our panelists' time as well, so thank you for that. There's an event immediately following this one, so all of our cars need to be out of the parking lot by 3:45, please. Staff will be available following the meeting if you don't feel comfortable speaking in public, or you can go to the city webpage, and we're going to have this on the even in the event that you disagree with another person's viewpoint. Now, I'm proud to introduce our panelists in alphabetical order. And I should also mention that soon on our screens you'll see our fourth panelist who's joining us from Charlottesville, Virginia. But let me begin. Excuse me, with Jeannine Bell. She's a Richard S. Melvin Professor of Law at Indiana University Maurer School of Law, where she teaches criminal law and procedure, First Amendment law, and is a nationally recognized scholar in the area of policing and hate crime. Bell has written extensively on hate crime and criminal justice issues. Her first book, Policing Hatred, Law Enforcement, Civil Rights, and Hate Crime, is an ethnography of police hate crimes unit. Her book titled Police and Policing Law is an edited edition that explores law and society's scholarship on the police. Her newest book is Hate Thy Neighbor, Moving Violence and the Persistence of Racial Segregation in American Housing. Please welcome Jeannine Bell. Dr. RaShall M. Brackney.
So I'm going to let her get her voice together and introduce our next speaker, Dr. RaShall M. Brackney, you'll see on the screen. She is the Chief of Police, joining us by Skype from Charlottesville, Virginia. Prior to her appointment as the Chief of Police for Charlottesville, Virginia, Dr. RaShall M. Brackney retired as a 30-year veteran from the Pittsburgh Bureau of Police and served as the former Chief of Police of the George Washington University. Dr. Brackney is a recognized expert in the areas of harm reduction, procedural and restorative justice practices, and community police relations. Dr. Brackney was selected by the Department of Justice to address bias, race, and hate crime reporting challenges in the nation. In addition, she was selected by the Divided Community Project to join their steering committee and the Vera Institute to serve on the National Steering Committee for Policing Programs. As a result of her work in social and racial justice, Dr. Brackney was granted a fellowship to Carnegie-Mellon University's Institute for Politics and Strategy, where she specializes in the influence of race on politics and policy. Dr. Brackney earned her bachelor's and master's degree from Carnegie-Mellon and a PhD from Robert Morris University. She holds numerous professional certifications and is a graduate of the FBI National Academy in Quantico, Virginia, the United States Secret Service Dignitary Protection Course in Washington, D.C., the Redstone Arsenal Bomb School for Managers in Huntsville, Alabama, and Leadership Pittsburgh. I have Roman numerals here, I'm trying to figure out what they are. It might be 14. So that's Dr. Brackney. Thank you. We also have Steve Sanders with us. Steve Sanders is Professor of Law at the IU Maurer School. He teaches constitutional law and litigation, family law, and conflict laws, and seminars on constitutional interpretation and judicial review. His scholarship focuses on the 14th Amendment's guarantee of equal protection and due process, with a special focus on issues affecting LGBTQ persons and same-sex couples. His work has been cited by, among others, the New Yorker, the Atlantic, the Washington Post, Federal District Court opinions, and briefs to the U.S. Supreme Court and numerous other courts. He has been designated a Henry H.H. Remack Distinguished Scholar by IU's Institute for Advanced Study and has been recognized with an IU Trustees Teaching Award and by Board of Law School Student and Students, an outstanding interactive professor. Sanders is also the former chairperson of the World Human Rights Commission. Human Rights Commission. And finally, we are joined by American Civil Liberties Union Indiana Executive Director Jane Henniger. Henniger has served as the Executive Director of the American Civil Liberties Union of Indiana since 2012. In this role, she leads the state ACLU affiliate in its work to defend individual rights and enhance and preserve liberties that are guaranteed by the U.S. and Indiana constitutions and civil rights laws. During her tenure, the ACLU in Indiana has grown to 12 employees and has more than doubled in the number of members and supporters. Also of interest to those of us gathered here this evening, Henry grew up on a farm here in Monroe County and received her JD from Indiana University Maurer School of Law. Thank you.
Appreciate you stepping in. Sorry about that, everybody. These panelists are here without compensation, so I want to thank them for so generously sharing their time and wisdom this afternoon. One more time, please let's welcome our panelists. I'm giving each of our panelists an opportunity, if they would like, to make a brief statement about their overall impression of the issues in question, and then we'll begin with a few opening questions. Jeannine, would you like to, do you have any question you'd like to, or opening statement?
I'll say a couple of things.
Is your mic on?
Let's see. Turn the mic on. All right, you got me. All right. So I've taught hate speech and the First Amendment since I came to Bloomington in 1999. So I know that these issues are fraught. I've also written in this area, in the area of hate crime and the First Amendment free speech issues since, for about 25 years, since before I came here. So I know that these are hard issues for people. The last thing I want to say about myself, by way of background, I've been a person who bought vegetables at the market since 1999 as well. And I've watched the change that has come about this summer, and it is not something that makes me feel either safe or comfortable at the market.
Thank you. Chief Brackney, welcome.
Sorry, I had you on mute. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, we are. Thank you. Do you have an opening statement you'd like to share? And thank you so much. I know you took time out of your Saturday to join us today. We're so grateful.
Thank you. I guess I want to just really share with you that I am really proud of your city for tackling this issue head on. This is an issue that in Charlottesville is very real and relevant every single day. We're still struggling with this issue, trying to balance what are the rights of those individuals whose values and visions may not align with ours, and keeping the community safe and vibrant. So I look forward to hearing your thoughts. Hopefully we can come to some ways to make you feel safer in your community, but also to help you to understand that you really do have agency in how your community is viewed and how you respond to it.
Thank you. Jane, would you like to do this?
I just want to thank the city for inviting me, thank all of the concerned citizens who are not only here today, but have been watching and being active on this hard issue for months and months. I was here last summer. I tried to follow what's been going on. Not always as closely as I would like. I will say that I'm saddened by the continuing troubles at the market. I'm worried as the daughter of a farmer, for the farmers and artisans whose livelihood has been harmed. And as an advocate, not only for the First Amendment, but for all of the constitutional rights that our country gives us, that protects all of the values that we share as Americans: fairness, freedom, equality. I'm deeply troubled by the open embrace of white supremacy that has poisoned America throughout its history. So, saying that, but I'm also heartened that communities of goodwill across the country, like here in Indiana, continue to debate these issues, this tension of rights, and continue to pursue the ultimate goal I think we all share, which is to keep our community safe, to keep our community free, and to invest in the long-term difficult work of dismantling, not only confronting this
But Steve, before you go, I do want to welcome our viewers who are watching on Facebook Live. Also, I want to thank Cats for broadcasting this afternoon. If you miss any part of today, this will be available online at Cats TV, so you can watch it anytime, share it as widely as you wish. Steve, thank you.
The farmers market has always seemed to me to be a wonderful example of something that a progressive city does to improve the quality of life for its citizens, for its community, and so I personally would hate to see that lost or diminished. I think it just stands as such a wonderful example of what only the city, through its government, through representing and bringing together people, can do. I've tried to watch and be aware of the developments this past summer. It seems to me that city officials and police have been, in my view, careful to abide by what the Constitution requires, to treat people in an even-handed way, and to uphold the values of this community, which include diversity, the safety of everyone, and respect for the rule of law. Sometimes I think the city or police have made judgments or taken actions in order to comply with the law, which have been misunderstood or misrepresented. From what I have seen, that criticism has often stemmed from simply a lack of understanding about what the law requires or dissatisfaction with the law as it is. So I look forward to the discussion and questions, and I think that no matter what we do here today, we will not succeed unless all sides in this conflict demonstrate a commitment to de-escalating and to demonstrating goodwill and to acting in good faith.
Thank you. We're going to mix the order up a little bit of our speakers. So Steve, I'm going to come right back to you if you don't mind to ask a question. And this is somewhat redundant from a question we asked in July, but it's still a germane question. So we're going to go ahead and start with, please share your thoughts on the Bloomington Parks Department's legal right to remove a vendor from the market because of their beliefs or their affiliation with hate.
I didn't attend July 4th, but I did see it. And I guess the short answer is I'm not meaning to be flip, but the First Amendment has not changed since July. I think the unanimous opinion on the panel at that time was no, the city could not do that, and that remains the case. I would state the level of the question, I guess, at a somewhat higher level of generality. To me, the principle is that government power, whether that's wielded by a city department, the police, the state, the federal government power cannot be used to punish or disadvantage people because of their beliefs, because of their political opinions, or because of their speech. Government can regulate actions, it can prevent discrimination, it can prevent violence, it can prevent threats, it can prevent harmful acts. It cannot punish or seek to dissuade people from speaking their beliefs or from believing what they believe and holding the associations that they have. So the short answer is no. A vendor could not be removed from the market simply because of what they believe or who they're affiliated with, whether it's a hate group or any other form of association.
So our second question is actually, has anything transpired over the course of the 2019 farmers market that's changed your views on this issue clearly?
No, as I said, I think we may talk about specific incidents or specific kinds of things that the police can or cannot do, why the police or the city have done what they have done and whether it was correct or not. But no, that is the basic principle that government power can't be used to punish particular people or groups for their political beliefs or to enforce a political ideology. It's a neutral commitment, it's a neutral value that is just, I think, part of the foundation of our constitutional commitments.
Chief Brackney, are you there? We're going to go back to the first question and say, please share your thoughts on the Bloomington Parks Department's legal right to remove a vendor from the market because of their beliefs or affiliation with hate groups.
So I actually agree absolutely legally with the panelists, and I think we have to be very cautious, regardless of our personal views and ideologies, that when we decide that we're going to regulate a certain type of speech, that being mindful that that can always, that lends big pushback on you, and someone will then attempt to regulate yours if they do not agree with your philosophies or values. It really is a difficult line to walk when you want to push back so vehemently against those things that you know believe to be right. But then we have to be very careful that we don't become the entity that we despise, that we regulate anyone who disagrees with us. And then where does that line stop throughout society based on who has power? And we've seen this in effect when a small group of individuals have power and the ability to regulate your actions and your words that should be protected. Unfortunately, whether I agree or disagree with your ideologies, I have a legal obligation to police and respond based on what the Constitution allows. And speech is, hate speech particularly, is not regulated under the Constitution, and nor can you do that within any of your statutes or ordinances. I'm sure the attorneys on the panel can help me out a little bit more with that. But even upon looking at your farmers market issue and the same issues that we faced in Charlottesville, when neo-Nazis and white supremacists marched through our Festival of Cultures, came intentionally to disrupt those groups who often have very little voice and feel marginalized, who are part of our refugee and settlement communities, with the intention to incite fear. And then how do you regulate that? You just absolutely, there are no legal authorities that any of us have to do that. And so I'm sure our panelists can to build a little bit more on that.
Thank you. Thank you. Do you have a question?
On that,
Yes. Yeah.
this is a very straightforward question.
This is a very straightforward question, and I don't think that you're going to get a lot of disagreement with anyone who knows a lot of this topic.
Thanks. Jean, you want to add anything?
No, I agree. And I would just say that whatever rules the city or any other governmental entity has about speech, it has to be applied with content himself. And that's the question.
Thank you. It's a question that's continued to come up throughout the season, so we wanted to go ahead and get that in today. Let's go ahead and jump to another question. Does the First Amendment allow for hate speech to be regulated? If so, how can speech that does not take place in the market be regulated? Jeannine, you want to start with this?
So
I'm not sure I understand the speech. Do you mean hate speech that doesn't take place in the market? Can it be regulated? Well, this is actually a more complicated question than your first questions.
We'd like to start off with the easy ones.
Okay. So, is it violent hate speech? How are you going to regulate it? If you're going to regulate it as hate speech per se, then it's the same response that there was to the first. But if you're going to regulate it because of its violence, hate speech can certainly be violent. For instance, exhorting individuals to kill people of color. That is hate speech, right? That is hate speech, that is violent speech, but that type of hate speech may be regulated. It depends on why you're regulating. If you're regulating it because it is hate speech, you may not, just like the first. And whether it's in the market or on the city streets, it makes no difference. If it is occurring on private property and it's not the government who is regulating it, then that's an entirely different situation. That maybe that's what you were trying to get at with this particular question.
On the isn't the only response by civic leadership to hate speech. So there are other ways that we can respond actively to the impact of hate speech. I mean, words have meaning, words have power. That's why we have the First Amendment. That's why it's so foundational to all our other rights. And that power can be used for evil as well as good purposes. So we as citizens, but also our civic leadership, our elected leadership, can use words and other actions as long as they don't censor others people's speech. They can actively oppose the impact, the effect, the power of hate speech.
Chief Brackney, would you speak to this? I know you've had this experience in Charlottesville.
Actually, we're actually experiencing it on a daily basis still, particularly as we're in preparation for the legislature changing in Virginia, and the response to the possible removal of Confederate statues throughout Charlottesville, which, as you know, was the original flaring point or hotspot point for the Unite the Right rally in 2017. So we are actually preparing, continue to prepare for this on a daily basis. Once again, you face the very similar challenges in that you can set up places to regulate speech and then give the opportunity for people to respond with opposing views. But as a government, you have so many more restrictions. You cannot inadvertently set up a space in which someone who has white supremacist views is silenced, and you set up a heckler's veto. And then the next thing you know, you're facing lawsuits from the same groups that you are having challenges with. And they will win if they can prove, and I'm sure we can back this by our lawyers, we are explaining this every day to our citizens. What I think you can do, though, versus the questions about can we regulate it, is what can you do to inform your citizenry in advance so that they do not feel like that they are put on the opposite sides or opposing sides of the same government who they believe is there to protect them. And I'm sure we're going to get into some of those questions on some of your cards over the next hour.
I'm sure that's true. Thank you so much. Steve, you ready for this question?
There are a few narrow categories of speech that are not protected. One is an imminent call to lawless action, the kind of thing my colleague Professor Bell described. Actually urging someone in a way that is clear and present to engage in an unlawful or violent act. That is not protected speech. What's called a true threat. That is, I threaten you, I put you in apprehension, I'm going to do something, and you believe I have the capability of carrying it out. That's speech, that is not protected. But hate speech itself is not a category that has any legal meaning. So the short answer is it can't be punished, it can't be regulated, in part because I think everybody would have a different definition of what hate speech is. And I said, since the three of us might disagree, to me, hate speech involves something that has real malice and real spite behind it. I think some people think that any comment that makes someone uncomfortable or is derogatory about somebody might qualify as hate speech. So that's one reason why, no, the law doesn't recognize hate speech as something that is insulated, that is apart from the protection of the First Amendment, because one reason is everyone has a different idea of what constitutes hate speech. So that is not carved off as some sort of thing that is outside the protection of the First Amendment. It's not.
So that's a great segue into the next question, which is what is a municipality's responsibilities to regulate speech if it could be reasonably expected that it will lead to violence? Is that different? Why don't you go ahead?
It is, but once again, it's generally, there are sort of two ways of regulating speech. What's called a prior restraint or censorship, or preventing somebody from engaging in a speech act before it even happens, or imposing punishment on someone after something happens. So once again, the type of situation Professor Bell described, what's called exhorting people or urging people to engage in an imminent lawless act. I think that's what you're describing. And so, no, if that happens and if the lawless act takes place, or if there's even a reasonable possibility, Professor Bell can correct me if I'm wrong, that the imminent lawless act could take place, that could be punished under, I suppose, disorderly conduct or some other kind of statute. But the thing is, the courts are generally very strict that it can't be just a call to violence in the abstract or hateful speech. It has to be, the facts of the situation have to give rise to a reasonable person believing that speech was going to imminently and almost to a certainty lead to the engagement of violence or a lawless act. That kind of thing can be punished criminally after it happens.
Jeannine, you want to speak to that one? Jeannine, you want to speak to that?
Just a general statement that we, ACLU, cautions against allowing government to invoke the threat of violence as a way to shut down speech. It's often been used as a way to shut down protests, and it's done in authoritarian governments all the time. It's been done here in the United States, and so that concern of security over the quality of the speech should always be very wary of allowing that unexamined to be used as a way of stifling speech in any kind of situation.
Thank you. Chief Brackney, I know you again have experience with this. What is the municipality's responsibility to regulate speech if it could be reasonably expected that it will lead to violence?
So you're probably already going to have, as the other panelists stated, you're already going to have statutes and ordinances in which your law enforcement professionals can already work with. There's never going to be a law that says free speech or hate speech is going to be regulated. Just for that reason, it depends on the lens in which you're looking to it. But when you're talking about leading to violence, we've already discussed that, fighting words are not protected. There are words that lead to violence and behaviors that incite my reasonable belief that I am in fear of my life based on something you're saying, you have the capability to carry out that threat. Those are always going to be regulated either through some terroristic threats or harassment or disorderly conduct or simple assault, depending on what the ordinances are within your community. I think the municipality has already had enough of the laws on the books that will help you when you're looking in forms of prosecuting an individual. The challenge is those same laws don't necessarily prevent it, because if laws prevented individuals from behaving a certain way that were not antisocial, then we would not need laws at this point. So when it comes to your responsibilities, as long as you have well-established ordinances and statutes that you have the authority to enact, you're doing your part. I would work with, again, the ACLU, individuals like your community activists and your law enforcement professionals to make sure that you have the right ordinances that can serve your community particularly, and not just a blanketed ordinance that does not give you the type of tools that you need to combat the issues that you're facing in your community.
Thank you. Go ahead, Jeannine.
I want to just add one quick note about regulation. It depends on what you use, how the city decides that they're going to regulate speech of any type. So there's a particular type of regulation called time, place, and manner regulation. And this is regulation that is not directed at the content of the speech. So it doesn't matter whether you're regulating speech that is pro a certain issue or anti a certain issue. This particular type of regulation, which courts have allowed for speech, just describes where you can, for instance, speech, right? That's time, place, and manner regulation. And it's actually neutral with respect to content. That's why the Supreme Court has allowed it. So, in one way, that's a response to the question, can we regulate hate speech? Sure, you can regulate hate speech. You can regulate hate speech with time, place, and manner regulation. Because you're actually able to regulate all types of speech with this particular type of regulation.
Thank you. Oh, go ahead.
So I'm hesitant to talk about a fine point of law, that's just type side of me. But I just want to point out that the limitation on time, place, and manner restrictions is that they can be reasonable. And so, for instance, the ACLU has had a number of cases over the years, including recent years and months, where that time, place, and manner restriction wasn't reasonable because it really didn't give the protesters the ability to truly protest. So, for instance, presidential meeting is taking place, the police want to confine the protesters to a certain area. They have to make that area close enough to the action so that their protest is meaningful. They can't, as sometimes they try, put them across town where no one will see them and their protest is meaningful.
And maybe just to put this in concrete
Sorry.
No, all I was going to do is elaborate to put this in concrete terms, because I think they resonate with things people are familiar with from developments. A perfect example of a time, place, and manner restriction is that the city has said within the vendor area, signs are not allowed, expressive activity about political views, leafleting is not allowed. That is allowed in what's called, I guess, First Amendment outing. So that's an example of a time, place, and manner restriction that is a neutral rule that applies to everyone in all forms of speech. The market vendor areas for selling kale and flowers, and First Amendment alley is for expressing your political views. That's an example of a time, place, and manner restriction.
So our panel has an uncanny knack for anticipating the next question coming, which is, and we're starting in with the questions generated from the audience now. What protest-related rules can a private market enforce? Not a public market, a private market. So this is a little different. This is a question that came from the audience. What protest-related rules can a private market enforce? Chief, do you want to start with this one?
So the first thing I would consider is what are your ordinances around protesting? So we have very clear ordinances about protesting. If it's over a certain number of individuals, you have to apply for permits. And that way, again, that can help with your regulation of time, place, and manner. You can then say, if you're in this area, during this time in this place, you can't obstruct the sidewalks, you can't obstruct the streets, or you may give permission to block the streets or the sidewalks. So the way that you do this in advance is, and as comfortable as this may sound, is you're going to have to start to reach out to those groups who would want to come into your communities and disrupt your communities, so that you can set the standards and set the boundaries for how they will interact in your communities. However, the important thing is that these rules have to be equal and equitable across the board. That if you have regulations around gatherings on your public spaces, what does that look like? Are there fees involved? Are there restrictions of the time of day that can occur? Are they allowed to have amplified sounds? There are a lot of things that you can do that can help set the stage early. You can identify free speech zones that allow you to help with this. I often suggest that you may want to have 2 free speech zones because you don't want to commingle people who may have varying opinions that it then continues to incite violence or the possibility of violence. So you can set up the space in a way that people can still enjoy the free market in your market, and your farmer's market may become that place that becomes your free market, right? That really talks about the freedoms of being in this space. You might even want to consider something that's a healthy option, of redesignating the space and calling it something like the Freedom Corner or the Freedom Market or the Free Speech Place. So that it almost gives you a little bit more ability to regulate who comes into those areas and how you get.
Thank you. Jeannine, you want to take this one? So a private space, you know, you can do any sort of regulation in a private space. First Amendment wise, right? Government shall makes no law is what the First Amendment says. So in a private space, so long as there are statutory prohibitions, then, you know, the person who owns the space can decide what speech they want in the
What if
space.
it's a rented space?
Who owned, rented from the government?
That's a possibility. I know that, you know, we have people who are private, some private markets rent from, you know, privately held other individuals, and some, I think, do rent from government. So it could go either way.
That is a more complicated situation because there is some government involvement in that, and moreover, I'm given to understand that civil liberties organizations are not so interested, and you can speak to this, Jane, in governments pushing off their responsibilities by contracting it out.
By not interested in you, we don't like it.
Right.
I mean, you guys, right, we look closely at attempts of government to circumvent the Constitution by privatizing.
Steve, you want to address this?
I'm not sure I really have anything else to add. I mean, if it's a purely private space, as Professor Bell said, you know, my house, my rules. I mean, whoever owns that space or controls that space or does the private market can include or exclude anyone they want. I mean, there may be certain civil rights ordinances that apply to private businesses that prevent discrimination on the basis of race or religion or sex. But other than that, I think it's as long as you're not disturbing the peace or doing something else that would give a police call to private property, then limitations on protests are whatever the owner wants.
Here's the next one from the audience. If the market becomes privatized, how then do vendors remain free to hold religious or political beliefs that may not be politically correct? Jane, you haven't started for a while. You want to start? That's so maybe.
So it's a private space. So it's a private space. How can vendors continue to hold views that are not politically correct? Well, I'm not going to use that language because I think politically correct is a flag for other things. You know, I don't think that the answer to that differs from what Jeannine and Steve have pointed out. The First Amendment, the Constitution protects citizens from government. There is a numbral effect or aspirational aspect of the Constitution that, you know, if our potential, if the goals of our Constitution, which I think most of us can agree we've never fully achieved, but if those goals are ones that we want to embrace as a society, that should mean that we also embrace them in our private interactions. So fairness, equality, and freedom is something that we want from our government. It also should be something that we seek in our individual interactions. But the Constitution no longer has a legal effect in that interaction. So I think that's the power of free speech advocates like the ACLU. We believe that speech has power. It can harm people, but it also can expose and provide the source for a better way. And if you hold beliefs, if you say things that people do not want to support, then that's your decision. And it's individuals' decisions whether to buy products from people who espouse that views. That's the power of speech on a two-way street.
Thank you. Do you need to come to the next one? No? Steve?
Yeah, but if I understood the question correctly, so the Constitution, First Amendment, restricts the government. And that is broader because it includes things like political viewpoint and affiliations. But as I mentioned before, there are city ordinances, the Bloomington Human Rights Ordinance, Indiana state civil rights laws, some federal civil rights laws that also protect private business operators, so that would include the operator of a private market, from discriminating on the basis of certain characteristics. And I'm not sure I'm going to remember all of them off the top of my head, but many of them are familiar to you: race, sex, religion, sexual orientation, gender identity in Bloomington, nationality, national origin. So there are those categories that even private businesses, including the operator of, let's say, a private farmer's market, could not discriminate on the basis of. Now, political viewpoint, political affiliation, that is something that is not traditionally covered by those types of civil rights ordinances. That's the kind of thing government can't punish you for, but it's not the kind of thing a private business, if a business wants to refuse service to me because I'm a Democrat or a Republican, they can do that. If they want to refuse service to me because of my nationality or because I'm gay or because of my race, that they can't do because of specific ordinances or statutes.
Chief, would you like to address this question?
Yes, I just wanted us to be really careful when we talk about this, and Steve just touched on it briefly. When you are open to the public, you've got to be careful when you're open to the public. That means people should have the ability to walk in, utilize those resources, patronize your facilities, etc. So if you've got to be careful that you don't find yourself thinking that privatization is the option that gets you where you want to be, attempting to regulate behaviors of individuals or ideologies of individuals whose behaviors and ideas don't align with ours. So be careful to think that privatization gets you completely there, because then you will find yourself on defending suits that you wouldn't necessarily have to defend. So could you stop that person who's dressed a certain way from walking into the farmer's market if it's open to the public? That's the challenges you still will face if it is open, and particularly if you privatize it by leasing it, or are you selling the entire property straight out to some individual or organizational group? So it's much more complicated than just let's privatize this.
Thank you very much. Again, anticipating the next question, which is, can the city be sued if they transfer management of the market to a private vendor with the intent to circumvent the First Amendment?
Yes, and it's not just can, it's will. Absolutely, right? And you noted that with the intention of circumventing the First Amendment, and well, they should be sued, and a government intending to circumvent the First Amendment, we all in this panel and all in this room, I think, like the First Amendment, right?
So this is where I believe that there's probably case law that talks about the difference when determining whether a government is privatizing actions that it would otherwise have to take or would take or should take as a government, and whether they shouldn't privatize it, or at least that privatization shouldn't lift the constitutional restraints associated associated with that, conducting that activity. So that's what I'm puzzling over, and I don't know the case law. You know, lots of city governments don't run farmers markets. Some do, some don't. So I don't know if, you know, there's a distinction between Wilmington stopping operating a farmers market and then being neutral as to whether somebody else starts it up and how they run it, as opposed to the city saying, we want to have a farmers market, we've always done it, we think it's part of our public duty, and so in order to make sure that it gets carried out, we're going to privatize it. Again, I don't know the law around here, but it seems to me that, so privatizing the farmers market seems different than privatizing police protection, right? I mean, you couldn't privatize police protection and say, and police, you do whatever you want, no congressional constitutional constraints. And so I suspect that there's a case law that talks about the kinds of activities that government can privatize and the kinds of constitutional constraints that go along, follow that activity.
I think motive and context also matter. I'm not sure I agree with Professor Bell that it's as clear cut. I mean, if the city came to a decision that it was not feasible in terms of economics, public safety, staff resources to continue operating the farmers market, it's going to get out of the business and allow a private operator to do it, I think that's a perfectly acceptable decision. I would regret it personally and politically, but I don't see anything in that would immediately get the city sued. I think the kind of thing we're talking about is, let's say there had been a lawsuit and the city was under a court order to do something, to refrain from some kind of conduct, to stop violating someone's First Amendment rights, and at that point the city decided we're just going to close the farmers market because it's seeking to avoid an affirmative order from a court, say, to do something. That I think would be a different situation. That would be more problematic. But to simply make the decision on the basis of a lot of different factors that the city can't be in the business anymore, I don't see that as immediate grounds for a lawsuit.
That's not what the question asked. So I was responding to the question as written.
Yeah, to get out of the First Amendment.
Right, yes. Okay. Chief, do you want to comment on this? Can the city be sued if they transfer management of the market to a private vendor with the intent to circumvent the First Amendment?
Well, again, once you add the last three words, intent to circumvent,
It's about intent, isn't it? Yes.
yeah, you're going to face some challenges. But what you should do is explore what are all of your options so that you can continue to have a vibrant, productive farmers market where people not only are safe, but they feel safe. And that this is a place where you can gather not only for purposes of produce and the things that our artisans bring, but what else do you find at that farmer's market? You probably find your social connections there, some other networking there that you want done, and you want to make sure that you do what you can to keep that space vibrant. And probably there are so many other ways, and I'm sure we'll get to that in the next half an hour, of what you can do versus what we can't do. And if we start approaching it probably from an asset mapping versus deficit point of view, I think you'll get a lot more out of your audience and at least your panels there who have all the legal expertise to push you in a direction that can be met.
That's a great point. We'll circle around that direction, so thank you for that guidance. I appreciate it. Steve, this is a question specifically for you. Could you explain your comment, this is quote, not understanding and dissatisfaction with the law as it is? What is, and I assume that's the end of the quote, what is the law that supports removal or prohibition of protests? I think I quoted you earlier today. Would you like to see this?
Yeah. I guess this is in response to something I said in my opening statement. Could you explain your comment, not understanding and dissatisfaction with the law as it is? I'm simply responding, I guess, to things I have seen, and I hate to talk in terms of sides, but I think there have been sort of two distinct camps in this controversy this summer. both of which have claimed that the city was showing favoritism to the other side, protecting one side's First Amendment rights and not the other side's First Amendment rights. Without getting into any specifics, I feel like I've seen statements to that effect from supporters of both sides in this controversy this summer. And in all the cases I saw, I simply thought they were unwarranted. If one side believed that the city or the police were showing favoritism toward one group or not treating people equally, my sense is it came from a lack of understanding of what the law is. That is, what is allowable in a time, place, and manner restriction. Why can protesters be ejected from the marketplace? And that's not a violation of First Amendment rights if the rule was established at the beginning as a neutral time, place, and manner restriction. So I hope that's helpful. That's what that is.
Thank you. Here's a question I can answer. It says, has the Divided Communities Project produced an initial report to the city? If so, why has it not been released to the public? We have not received that report yet. We have to get it later this month. So we have not seen it. That's why you have not seen it. And it will be released when we receive it. Okay, next question. Given the demographics of Bloomington being 83% white, 4.6% African American, 0.3% Native American, 8% Asian, 3.5% Hispanic Latino, doesn't the market already reflect those demographics in its customer and vendor population? Therefore, what exactly does the city mean when they refer to making the market more inclusive? It's a difficult thing to ask you to speak for the city, but I'd really like your comment on this. Would you begin, Jeannine? You're welcome to see this.
All right, so my sense is that this person is asking why the city is trying to make the market more inclusive. I don't quite understand this question. I don't understand this question. So, do you understand? Yeah, no. My sense from this is my guess.
Well, I tell you what, we've still got time. If the person who wrote that question wants to clarify it for us a little bit, that would be really helpful. We want to answer it. We just aren't sure we really get what the exact question is.
Happy to help.
Yeah.
Happy to help.
Yeah. And you can do it in writing, just, yeah.
Okay, so
Well, I don't know.
Go ahead.
I'll take a guess. And
Do our best.
and people don't always want to use their comfort and writing down a question. So I think that there's more to inclusivity than numerical reflections. We have been basically internally, because everybody needs to do work on this, right? So we've been doing work. And so we've been focusing more on the word belonging as opposed to inclusivity. The idea that if you include people, you're including them to what exists, right? And in our country, what exists, even when it's in a beautiful, loving city like Bloomington, what exists reflects the history of our country, and not all of that is good. So rather than thinking about inclusivity, a better manifestation of inclusivity is belonging. And that, the idea of that is that instead of inviting people who traditionally live on the outside to join, instead you ask them and invite them, and they participate in creating something together, right? So then whatever that thing is, the city, the market, the community, belongs to everyone who's then made it, right? So just assuming that, so guessing, if I were the city and I were to have said that I want the market to be more inclusive, that is what I would have meant, that I wanted to be more reflective of a community space that we have created together and where everybody has a sense of belonging.
In that context, I simply interpret the word inclusive as well. The city is getting into parsing, what percentage of what demographic group is represented. It's no matter who you are, what you look like, what part of where you come from, you are welcome in that space. That's what I was going to say.
Chief, do you have any comments on that? That might have been a hard one to follow from your.
Yeah, I think when we start to think about demographics as the only point of reference for what does it feel like to belong in a space, what does it feel like to be able to contribute, then we lose the bigger picture, right? Because then we're using often data not as a point of inclusion, but often to exclusion. Well, to say, well, if it's 83%, Caucasian or white, and we have 83% of that in the market, then we don't want anybody else who doesn't fit in that demographic. We're already meeting the demographic. But do you feel as though you belong in that space? Do you feel as though you can contribute? Do you believe that you have value there? And I think that's probably what what you're going for, and oftentimes we just get stuck on data points. And when we do that, there's some very unintended consequences versus those ones that we thought were just readily and immediately noticeable. So I'm not really sure exactly what the audience member was attempting to, the point they were attempting to make by that, but I'm sure it was just, hey, we felt like things were okay up until this point. So using words like inclusion, does that mean we have to include those persons who disrupted our space?
Thank you. Okay, here's the next question. Are the panelists suggesting that the city reach out to and to speak with white supremacist organizations to inform them of local ordinances about the market? Would this entail city officials speaking with white supremacists, neo-Nazis, and militia members to define unacceptable behaviors at the market?
I'm going to just jump right on in here on this one. As uncomfortable as it is, you've got to have those difficult conversations. You've got to establish liaisons with groups that you do have challenges with, because they're coming to your community anyway. They're coming. So you better be as prepared and as informed as you can. One of the strategies we used in 2018, after 2017 in the Unite the Right rally, I made it extremely clear. You can come to Charlottesville, absolutely. Feel free to come to Charlottesville. However, we will not tolerate your violence. We will not tolerate disrespecting the community. And if there are those behaviors that can be policed, rest assured we're going to police you and use every aspect of our resources to do that. Once you set the table for what the expectations are, and that you will not deviate from those, and that you will police their behaviors, and they understand that, it is really much more helpful. The other thing is, they want to talk about the stuff they want to do. So in reality, it prepares you, it gives you additional information, because they brag about this stuff all the time. They're proud of their behaviors. So it allows you then to prepare and respond to the behaviors in a way that continues to keep your community safe. It's uncomfortable, but somebody's got to do it. I would identify a liaison for any of these types of groups and use your law enforcement and your community outreach groups and even your faith-based groups who have a lot of legitimacy in your community to help you with those very difficult conversations.
Thank you. Jeannine, you want to comment on this? I can tell.
Yeah, so on the issue, for instance, of market vendors, market vendors may not discriminate. I wonder the extent to which the city has interfaced with all of the market vendors about discrimination and explained, listen, we won't tolerate discrimination in any way, shape, or form. And we're going to be watching to see if you discriminate. And again, I'm not suggesting suggesting anything targeted. I'm entirely content neutral. But, you know, this is something that I would consider it an obligation of the city because no one's entitled to discriminate. That's the way it works.
Did you like to comment on this one, Steve? No? Okay, thanks. I'm going to read the next two together. They are kind of two sides of a coin. The first one is why were protesters that targeted Schooner Creek Farm allowed to disrupt the market and walk back and forth in front of their space? And the next one is the Purple Shirt Brigade continues to push the envelope on their protests. How do we enforce protesting in the designated location? That's what they mean. So both sides are in there.
Could you repeat the first question?
Sure. Why were protesters that targeted Schooner Creek Farm allowed to disrupt the market and walk back and forth in front of their space? Oh, please, okay, then I think I take it back. They're both kind of referring to the same protest, I think. Purple Shirt Brigade continues to push the envelope on their protest. How do we enforce protesting to the designated location? So what can a market leadership, if you will, the entity responsible for running a market, what can they do to regulate that kind of thing?
Well, I mean, we've talked about time, place, and manner restrictions, and I've seen and downloaded the rules that the market promulgated, I think, in June of this year, published in Random Farm in June of this year. I think the question is whether it enforces those rules in a content-neutral way. Again, my subscription to the Bloomington paper lapsed, so I'm not able to get all the articles. But I've heard concerns on the other side that the protests and sign rules have been disproportionately enforced against the protesters against Schooner Farms. I don't know the basis of either. I will say that in a litigation in the case law, it's very fact specific, case by case, whether First Amendment protections are violated, and especially in instances like this where it's potentially content-based enforcement, selective enforcement. If the facts suggest that at any one point in time or comparatively that those rules are not being enforced in a content-neutral way, that's something that we would like to know about. That's all I can say. I mean, I can't speak to the actual facts, but if there is evidence of a failure to enforce those laws in a content-neutral way, we would.
Steve, do you have comments?
I do recall one of the most recent news articles I saw was a certain unicorn was arrested. That seems to be the kind of person that this question is speaking to. So that feeds my sense that the city and the police have tried to be even-handed in this. Now, going back to something I said in my opening statement about sort of gamesmanship and goodwill, I mean, when people decide, well, T-shirts, can we do T-shirts? What if we all wear the same T-shirt? What about hats? What if we all wear the same hat? So, people are going to be creative and try to game the system and try to see what they can get away with on both sides. And, if that continues, it makes it hard to draw these lines. But I think we have to insist and expect that the police and the city will do it fairly and even-handedly, as Jane said, content neutral way. But part of this requires goodwill and good faith on the part of the sides in this conflict as well, to not try to play around and push the boundaries just to see what they can get away with.
Chief?
So, in 2017, the city of Charlottesville absolutely failed at this. And what I mean by that is, the Unite the Right rally had a event permit. And of course, they were able to set, exactly as you said, time, manner, and place. However, what they did not do well was communicate out to the public what those time, manner, and place restrictions were, so that it often gave the appearance that the officers were escorting neo-Nazis into the city to protest, and that those persons who were protesting against them were being policed. And the difference is that when the United Right applied for their permitting, the requirements were that the police would escort them into the place so that they could minimize violence. But when you don't put that out to the community, it feels like you've given them a dignitary escort into the city because you align with their values. The outgrowth of that was chanting to this day that cops and Klan go hand in hand. And we face it every single day because it was such a failure, an abject failure to communicate exactly what the laws required the city to do, as well as the law enforcement professionals who were there. The way we had to at least try and recover from that, restore some legitimacy, is when we were experiencing marking the events of 2017 in 2018, we had to literally go out, and I met with hundreds and thousands of individuals about what those expectations were, what our legal authority could be as the public, how they could protest, legally do that, and how they could do it in a way that they could get their message out and then not find themselves on the opposite end of legal ramifications because they had not organized and had not gotten permits as well. So there should be a responsibility for government, for your law enforcement agencies there, to get the message out about what they can and cannot legally do, even if that means walking through the permits for these protests and for these gatherings so that the public has a full view of that. Unfortunately, just walking through your farmer's market, unless they're actively pushing over some of your stands or threatening individuals, walking through is exactly the same event that we faced in July of 2017 prior to the United Right rally. And there's nothing you can do about someone walking through into open public spaces unless they're being physically disruptive, violent, or that type of speech that is not protected.
Thank you. Really interesting. Okay, here's our next question. How does time, place, and manner apply to online space?
I don't think it does unless we're talking about using the computers at the library, which they control. I mean, online space, meaning what people say on email or websites, on Facebook, things that have no connection to the city has no legal right to control. I mean, the government cannot control, punish, dictate what you say online unless you're using a city website or a city-owned facility of some kind. Government has the right to impose time, place, and manner restrictions on public property and public spaces, not on private property and not in private domains such as the online community.
James.
This is just sort of related. I mean, we have had cases where if there's a public Facebook page or a public, public official uses their Facebook page to conduct business, to talk about their public actions in the city, the farmers market had a Facebook page. They couldn't censor people on that, so you can't use it for public purposes and then keep the comments that are positive and delete or block the comments that are negative. But I don't think that was exactly what we were talking about.
Actually, we wouldn't use time, place, and manner regulation. The proper way to talk about this is forum. Is it a public forum? Is it a designated public forum? And that is the, so for instance, there was a recent case involving the president's determination was that that was a designated public forum. So his ability to block users was limited because it was a designated public forum. So that's the area in which we, that's how we deal with online spaces.
Chief, you want to weigh in on this? The online issue?
So yeah, exactly that. If you post the farmers market on your city's website, and which people have access to it, you cannot regulate that. However, unless, again, the only thing you can do is respond if that language is threatening, or if that language is, and you believe the person has the ability to carry out that threat. Otherwise, there's some very ugly things that people post, that at best you can put the, it may contain sensitive or obscene language in it, and then they force them to click on it. Otherwise, again, based on recent rulings, there is not a lot that you can do around that if it's your public space.
Okay.
What I said, a time, place, and manner is like we're setting these rules in advance. I didn't want to be understood to say that somebody who uses Facebook, email, and web to harass people, to libel someone, to commit a crime. Sure, of course, those things can be investigated and regulated, just like if you use the telephone or any other communications medium to commit a crime. Online activities can be the subject of criminal investigation and punishment.
All right, this is interesting. This next question, would a rule be enforceable that simply says, quote, anyone disrupting commerce in the market shall be removed? Is that enforceable? Chief, would you weigh in on that, please?
Can you repeat it? All I heard is shall be removed.
You bet. The question is, would a rule be enforceable that simply says, anyone disrupting commerce in the market shall be removed?
Ooh, that's going to be interesting. And you probably will get challenged at some point in court over that. One, because the persons who would have to enforce that would be your law enforcement professionals, and then you just said to them they had absolutely no discretion. And there are very few laws that say officers have no discretion. What does disruptive mean? You're going to start to have some issues around that as well. And then you're also going to put your law enforcement professionals and your officers in a position where they can never help mediate through what some of those issues may be as well. But I will leave it to the legal scholars. You have three amazing ones sitting there to parse that one out.
Which one of our amazing legal scholars wants to talk to?
I'm going through my papers because I think I printed out someplace or cut and pasted the market rules, which I think lists that as a reason for being, I can't find it. I guess the question is, if that's the reason why someone is removed and they think that it was really because of their speech, then they should come and see us. We were talking about that would be big. If they were removed for other things, and again, I think I printed the rules out, but I don't see it. If they were removed for other aspects of full right violation, a sign, breaking the sign, prohibition, et cetera, then the city may not be hanging its hat on that big. I'll leave it to the legal scholars to tell me what their analysis is.
Yeah. When I first heard that, I thought, that's really vague. That's vague enough to be challenged. And the challenge, what the individual who's removed under that sort of rule would say is, well, what I was doing was exercising my First Amendment rights in this particular context. Is that, this feels really vague. So, again, Jane told you what to do to that.
The city would be much better advised to be more specific, blocking traffic, impeding the flow of pedestrians, pedestrians, to say disrupting commerce. The problem is it simply leaves too much discretion. I'd like to leave somebody books who's standing over there. I think they're disrupting commerce, so I'm going to arrest it. That's part.
So specificity is important when it comes to the rules.
Because the First Amendment generally dislikes giving public officials and police too much unbounded discretion.
Okay, another question. We've got, how much time left? Considering the rise of white supremacy locally, city leaders such as the mayor of Boise, Idaho, have taken a stand against white supremacy by signing an ordinance against white supremacy and committed to trainings for city staff on how to recognize and combat it. Since then, several cities have followed suit. Do you see any legal issues arising from such an ordinance being signed?
The government has the ability to speak, right? That is government speech. They are suggesting that the government has particular views about white supremacy.
I have to admit, I didn't hear exactly what the ordinance
So
would
they want,
say.
the ordinance would basically to stand against white supremacy by signing an ordinance against it.
We encourage governments to take those kinds of stands.
I think as long as that's the expression of the government's viewpoint, yes, that's fine. And I feel like Mayor Hamilton has done that a number of times in public forums. But an ordinance against white supremacy could also mean it's going to somehow be punished or so it depends on what we need. If it's simply a government statement of its values and principles, then I agree that is completely fine under the First Amendment.
Chief, do you have such a thing in Charlottesville?
So under the form of a resolution versus an ordinance in which there would be some legal enforcement.
Right.
So you can do a resolution or proclamation that says, in the city of Charlottesville, we stand firmly against white supremacy, and hate will not be tolerated here. So it is good to understand and set your expectations. But again, it's an ordinance in which there would have some legal ability to enforce. I think it would just be difficult because that it really is. It would be challenging, but I would absolutely, if I was the city of Bloomington, make a very strong statement through your council, through your mayors, that you stand firmly against this in the form of a proclamation or resolution. You could do this as, we declare this, a no hate day in the city of Bloomington, or whatever that might look like to celebrate.
Can I just add, I totally agree with the chief that mostly those statements are done through resolutions. I also think that there are, that's a statement of values, and then there are different ways that communities, including governments, can act out those values. And a human rights ordinance is just that. It's one manifestation, one way of combating through public accommodation white supremacy by barring discrimination based on certain aspects.
Thank you. We're going to have to be quick on this one. We're running out of time. Could the city prevent someone, an individual who advocates violence or law breaking or participates in violence and law breaking from entering the market? For example, could there be a restraining order against the white supremacist leaders who have visited the market?
I can tell you a tool we used that was pretty successful. We started negotiating with consent decrees, in which we came to agreements that they would not come to Charlottesville. That we went after the organizations particularly. And if they were affiliated with an organization, we entered into those type of consent decrees. That if they still belong to one of the groups, Proud Boys or Patriot Prayer, that no more than 2 of them could be in there. They could not wear certain types of clothing that would identify their group. And those were the negotiations that we went into after
after the events of August of 2017 in the Unite the Right rally. So I think there's some opportunities for the city of Bloomington to do something like that says, you're not going to be productive here. This is not a place you're going to be productive by bringing your rhetoric to this place and then get them to work through that. And it does take some work and some negotiations, but it is an interesting and innovative way to keep certain groups out of or the organized groups out of your communities. And currently there are more than 1,020 hate groups designated throughout the United States as designated by the Southern Poverty Law Center. And that's been literally on the rise since 2015. So there needs to be some innovative approaches to this issue.
Thank you. Jeannine, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, this is great.
Okay, thank you. We're going to wrap up. This is just one last thing. In terms of the potential future viability of the city market, do you have a sense of how many vendors plan to return next year? These guys won't know that, but representatives of the Parks Department responded that they have a strong sense that many vendors will return, but they are waiting on to find out what changes are going to be announced on January 9th. So that's fair. Well, we are just about at the end of our allotted time. I hope this discussion has been informative and useful. These continue to be difficult, emotionally charged issues requiring time and patience to work through. Recognizing, as we've discussed this afternoon, the law prevents the city from taking some kinds of action to combat beliefs we find aberrant or with which we strongly disagree. The city believes that ongoing dialogue and educational avenues for us to direct our community towards a more inclusive future. We'll continue to seek input on how we as a community, not just the government, can live out our values together. Andrew, if you want to go ahead and put the website up for people if they want to reach us that way. Again, I want to thank our panel. I want to thank especially the chief who joined us from Charlottesville today. That was terrific. Thank each of you for being here. We have an embarrassment of riches when it comes to wisdom in our community. And we're so grateful that you joined us today. Thank you. Thanks again to our panelists. I want to thank the staff that worked the event today, took a Saturday and came in and worked. And also thanks to each of you in the audience for being here. Have a great afternoon. And I hate to rush you, but we do need to get our cars out of the parking lot by 3:45. Thanks.